Hello, good afternoon. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, the series that features women who are working to save historic places. Thank you to our series sponsor, DMX Architecture in Fayetteville, Arkansas, for their generous support of Women in Preservation. May is National Historic Preservation Month and Arkansas Heritage Month. Help us celebrate by becoming a member of Preserve Arkansas for as little as $50 a year. Your membership provides vital support to our organization and allows us to continue the important work of saving Arkansas's historic places. Learn more and join on our website at preservearkansas.org. Join us next month on June the 11th for a talk by Kelly Wilson, who is an architect and contractor for Bashir's Construction in Fort Smith. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Kimberly Butt. Born and raised in Arkansas, Kim is a preservation architect, architectural historian, and principal at Trainer HL. Fascinated by the stories that historic structures and cultural resources represent, Kim helps building owners and stakeholders seize the opportunity to protect and enhance their properties. With more than 22 years of experience, she guides her clients through the historic preservation process to develop architectural solutions that respect the history of both people and place while preparing for the future. Kim has documented, evaluated, restored, and rehabilitated historic buildings throughout California and the Pacific Northwest. As an architectural historian, she is passionate about exploring the history of culture and place and has prepared National Register nominations, Historic American Buildings Survey documentation, and historic resource evaluations. Kim currently serves on the City of Richmond, California Design Review Board. She was previously a member of the Richmond Historic Preservation Advisory Committee for 16 years. Kim holds a Master of Science in Architecture from UC Berkeley and a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Arkansas. Welcome, Kim.
Right.
Hi, it's all yours.
Okay. Okay, is it sharing properly?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk today in your Women in Preservation series. That's a really great series, and I've enjoyed watching videos in preparation for this, hearing what other women are up to and doing. As I already shared with you, I just want to apologize up front. I am a little underprepared, although I have had months to know about this. I just kept not getting it together. So it's going to be a little bit off the cuff. So today, I guess I'm just going to kind of talk about what I do in preservation and what my connections back to Arkansas are. I do, as Rachel said, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area in the East Bay, and I've been out here for about 23 years now. Go here, but I'm born and raised in Fayetteville, definitely in Arkansas. And there I've got my requisite photo with Bill Clinton. I graduated from Fayetteville High School, went to the University of Arkansas where I got my BArch. And of course, my husband and I, who are both architects, got married in Thorn Crown Chapel. But basically, just kind of a little background about me. So I was the third child of FH and Myrna Martin. My dad's family's from Arkansas, and as far back as I know, they're from Arkansas. Potentially, they go back to the old Valines homestead on the Buffalo River. At least that's what my husband says, but I've never actually proved it. And my mom, although originally from Nebraska, moved to Arkansas when she was about 13. My parents moved to Fayetteville for my dad to attend law school and stayed. I didn't actually know any architects growing up. I mostly grew up around judges and lawyers. But I was always told that my dad did legal work for Fay Jones, and I think possibly for John Williams, but also not 100% on that one. I will say, though, that the local design aesthetic of Fayetteville and Arkansas really did shape me at an early age. I just didn't know it at the time. But a lot of my favorite buildings in the area were those of Ed Stone and Fay Jones, Ernie Jacks, or Fowler, Cy Sutherland. As a kid, I just knew these buildings is where I went for story time and dance recitals or, cool neighbors' houses. I was not one of those kids that knew they wanted to go into architecture at an early age, although looking back, I probably should have been able to figure that out. I don't think every kid, maybe they did, raked floor plans out of leaves when they were cleaning the yard or constantly were exploring construction sites and dragging their mom through houses that were almost done. But ultimately, after I graduated high school and decided to go to Arkansas, I blended kind of my love of art and math and thought, well, actually, what I thought was my mom said, you're always so obsessed with going through open houses and houses under construction. Why don't you consider real estate? And I said, absolutely not. I want to design them. I'm going to try out architecture. So I went into architecture at the U of A and never looked back. And I would say I fell in love, with architecture and history for a variety of reasons. Let's see, I can go on to one. When I was at the U of A, I took advantage of all the opportunities I had to travel abroad. So I got to go to the spring break in Peru, and I went to Rome, of course, the semester abroad, and I studied in Mexico. Those all really led to informing my views and love of historic architecture, but also I also just really loved the architectural history classes. And, oh, sorry, my light went off. Hold on. I have to move. There we go. Shuts down. Sorry about that. Also, I loved the architectural history classes, worked under Professor Smart and Ethel Goodstein. And I didn't really realize that not everyone enjoyed those as much as I did or was that into architectural history. I just always thought Murray Smart was giving me a hard time because he would always call me out in classes to answer. But then I think looking back, he probably just knew that I had read the assignments. So kind of on my path to how I ended up in preservation was all of this from school. And then during the summer, I interned in San Francisco Bay Area. I actually met my husband at the U of A. He's also an architect, and his dad has a firm in the East Bay. And so one summer we came out and worked for his dad's firm. This was in the late 90s, so not that long after the American with Disabilities Act had been passed. And so institutions everywhere were trying to make sure they were in compliance and get up to speed. And Interactive Resources, where we were working that summer, they had gotten contracted by the Stanford University to come and survey their entire campus for accessibility compliance. So my husband, Andrew, and I went out there and joined the team, and we spent the summer surveying the campus. Well, I learned very early on that if I was going to have to spend my days surveying, measuring toilets and drinking fountains, I at least wanted to do it in the pretty buildings. So when we divvied them up every day, I would go with the preservation architect on the team and spent the summer in all the historic buildings on the Stanford campus. Then when I finished school and we came back, we ultimately moved back to the Bay Area in 2001 after I graduated in December of 2000. And I went back to that preservation architect that I had lobbed onto every day at Stanford to see about getting a job there. And I ended up working for small company called Carrying Company in San Francisco. They were located in the historic fire station number 2 there on the left. It was a really amazing little firm that I spent 3 years at, learning the craft of historic preservation, working in downtown San Francisco. And I did all my internship hours there toward my licensure and got to learn really on just a variety of amazing projects, from cultural resource work to architecture, working on projects like the Palace of Fine Arts shown here, Murphy Windmill, Scotty's Castle and Death Valley, a lot of really interesting things in San Francisco and all around California, ranging from small park projects to large institutional projects. Even I think one of my first projects was working on the California State Capitol. But also while I was there, I got to learn a lot about working with cultural resources and working on the evaluation side, and really what you could do with architectural history that was outside of the realm of academia, but actually within the field and the practice. And so I began learning how to do National Register nominations and building evaluations, doing entire surveys of neighborhoods, cities, and that whole aspect inside of the practice. And I found that I really enjoyed being able to, for a while, focus and do research and writing, and then still jump over and do the design and do the drawings and do the construction work. So after I finished my 3 years of my internship, I decided that I was really interested in focusing more on the research aspect. And so I went to UC Berkeley to get a Master's of Science in Architecture, focusing on architectural history. And so while I was there, I got to work with professors like Stephen Tabriner and Kathleen James Chakraborty, Paul Groth, Richard Walker, really an amazing group. One of the things I enjoyed doing was I was a research assistant for Stephen Tabriner for his book, Bracing for Disaster. And I fact-checked every single endnote in that book. And so at that time, I loved the research part. I loved being at Berkeley. And definitely considered going on into their PhD program, because it really was a master's program that fed directly into PhD, and that was kind of what they encouraged you to do. And while I loved that, and I really thought it was just great, reading books and articles and then coming back to small classes of like 10 people and sitting around and telling each other how smart you are. I mean, I could do that all day. It was fabulous. I still missed the actual construction and architecture. So I looked at it and I thought about doing a PhD, but ultimately I thought I don't really have the same passion that Stephen Tabriner does for the amount of time and effort it took him to make that book. And he was so excited about the arguments that it gave. And I thought, I don't think I can be that excited about it. I've got to have something a little more concrete in my life. So I went ahead and finished my master's and then went back into the practice. But also, just about 4 days, I believe, after I graduated, our first daughter was born. So that also kind of slowed down my growth and preservation for a little while. And we moved to, or we live still in Point Richmond, but one of the one of the fun undertakings we did at that time was to rehabilitate this house. It was a family affair, honestly, with my in-laws and us, and we took this house that had been modernized in the 1950s and brought it back to its 1903 appearance. And that is where we live in cute little historic downtown Point Richmond today. So a little bit about the firms I've worked in. The first one I talked about was Carrying Company. Again, it was in downtown San Francisco, a small woman-owned business. Alice Carey has started the firm in the early 1980s. And she really was a dynamo, kind of a force to be reckoned with. And I consider her, I consider myself very lucky to have had her as a mentor. She really put her firm on the map by getting the rehabilitation of San Francisco City Hall. They won that, and that gave her foot in the door in preservation ultimately over the next 3 decades to really become one of the top 3 preservation firms in San Francisco. She was a fierce advocate for preservation and a very strong businesswoman. There was a lot to learn from her, and a lot I probably should have paid more attention to at the time. But after I left there, I did continue always having a relationship with Carrying Company, and I would come back from time to time and help with whatever they might need work with, if they needed someone to do a report or to assist on a project. And so I would do that, and always stayed very close in contact and connected with everyone that I worked with there, and still have. But after I finished at Berkeley, and when our children were young, I went to work with the family firm. So this is up on the upper right-hand picture. There's Tomba and Andrew Butt. Andrew is my husband, and that's his father, my father-in-law. He started Interactive Resources, an architecture engineering firm in 1973, the year before my husband was born, in downtown Richmond, California, Point Richmond. And my husband actually is now the managing principal of that firm. So I went to work there as they offered me the most flexibility, and got to continue my preservation practice, building on the practice that Tom had had for years, including East Brother Light Station there in the middle, which is still a labor of love that he works on the weekends today. But an old lighthouse that was decommissioned and got restored, and now you can go stay on it in the bay. It's a bed and breakfast in Richmond. But while I was there, and I got to continue working and kind of do my own preservation projects, a lot of those when I was with the kids being young, I did a lot of cultural resource work, meaning I could do a lot of the reports and National Register nominations and assessments. And those were really great because those projects have such a short time span. I could complete them in a matter of months rather than an architecture project which can be a matter of years. But I did also get to do, I worked on several historic rehabilitation projects while I was there as well, including the Sassoon Train Depot. This is the next one is the Napa First United Methodist Church that was damaged in the Napa earthquake. We all worked. Andrew really led this project, but the Novato City Hall, we actually moved the building, moved it back after we put a new foundation under it, and then did an addition connector on the back. And then our local historic depot that got turned into a bank in Point Richmond. So I stayed with Interactive Resources until 2017, when you're kind of a long story, but essentially Alice Carey had passed away in 2013, and the two partners, principals who were still running the company at that time were looking to ensure its stability and to grow. And they looked to find a company that they could merge with or that could acquire them. And they ended up finding Trainer HL, which is an architecture firm with a strong preservation studio located, headquartered in Lawrence, Kansas. And I knew that they had done this transition and had talked to Nancy and Bill about it, and that was great. And, come and visit them. And then in 2016, I got a call from someone who wanted to talk to me about carrying company. And I thought, and I wasn't very quick on the uptake. I had my husband listen to it and said, I don't know what this guy wants to know. And he said, well, they're looking for, that's a recruiter and they want to talk to you about a job. I thought, well, that's funny. Why didn't they just call me? So it turns out that Trainer was looking for a senior architect in their preservation studio in San Francisco. But Nancy, who I had worked with forever, had told them when my name came up, oh no, Kim wouldn't want to do that. She's working with her family and she has babies. Well, the babies grew up and I was ready to move on from the small projects I could kind of do by myself back to larger institutional projects and to be working with a larger group of people all focused on preservation. So at that time, I ended up taking the job and going to Trainer HL, which really for me was like going back to carrying company in a lot of ways. And so this is just kind of showing both a lot of the work that the two companies do there. Again, the one on the top left is the state capital of California. And that was one that I had worked on at carrying company when I left. And then when I came back, it was one of the first projects that I got put back onto. We just at that time did a host of small projects, kind of whatever they needed. So the first thing I did was work on a renovation of their basement cafeteria. So I was right back at the state capitol. Trainer HL, the preservation studio there, also has a great portfolio that includes the Kansas State House and the Oklahoma State Capitol and even some work on the Missouri State Capitol. But although we have one thing I really like about the group and the studio and the firm, but especially the preservation studio, is not only do we just have these large iconic projects, we still get to do all the little labors of love. That is what kind of stirs my passion for preservation. And I just threw up a few of those over here on the side. There's the St. James AME Church in Topeka. The one in the middle is Bing Kong Tong in Isleton, California. And we've got a small project in Texas and Rio Vista. So that really kind of helped to allow me a little more space to expand and get to work with my people, back with people in preservation. So now I'm still with Trainer HL. I'm a principal there in their preservation studio based out of our San Francisco office. And I was just going to kind of go over like what I've done in preservation, what my career looks like in preservation. So one aspect of it is cultural resource work. And that's really the research and the writing, and that's assessments and evaluations. And in California specifically, we have a law that is similar to, I think most people are familiar with NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. Well, we have CEQA, the California Environmental Qualities Act, and that has protections for historic resources. And there's a component of that where pretty much anytime you take a building that is over 50 years old and you submit it for some type of renovation or demolition or something that you're going to need a discretionary permit for, then the agency you take it to will require you to do an evaluation. And this varies from city to state and every different area. But in general, that's that kind of 50-year rule of thumb. And you do an evaluation and you survey the building and go through the criteria and determine if it is eligible to be a historic resource. So that kind of gives a whole focus very specific to California and California history and working as a cultural resource specialist or preservation specialist in California. Also on that side of the fence, I've done National Register nominations. These are 3 sites that I've got listed on the register. And one of them is the Veterans Memorial Hall in Crockett, California, the Atchison Village Historic District that's part of the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historic District in Richmond, California, as is Nystrom Elementary there on the right. And I'm very proud to say I got all 3 of those on the National Register. And I did help my father-in-law this year get his historic schoolhouse in Sierra City, California, listed on the National Register as well. I put historic recourse surveys, or resource is what I meant to say. And that's doing like a survey of an entire neighborhood or a city. You go and you do windshield surveys and look at the different buildings and kind of go through and just essentially you're letting the city know this is an area that you potentially have historic resources, and let's talk about what you need to do there and protections and planning and all of that. And so that folds into environmental compliance documents, as well as resource documentation, which I think were mentioned, like the Habs Hair documentation, the Historic American Building Survey, or and those I think now is really great. I'm pretty sure Greg Herman does a lot of that at the school. That was not there when I was there, but I did get to learn about it through actually doing it in my first few years working in preservation. Then on the architecture side, of course, I follow the Secretary of the Interior standards and all the projects I do, and those are my guidelines. And the 4 treatments that are issued there are preservation, rehabilitation, reconstructions, or restorations. And of those, the majority of the work that I do is in building rehabilitation. And that's, similar to building reuse, where you're basically taking a building, you're saving all the character defining features and the historic materials, but you're modernizing it for reuse. Whereas reconstruction is when something is gone and you actually rebuild it. And that is what's shown on the Manzanar watchtower there on the left. That is one of the very few reconstruction projects I've ever been involved in. And that was at the Manzanar Japanese internment site in Southern California. This was reconstructed for the National Park Service. And then restorations are also pretty rare. Most everything is rehabilitations, but as part of the Jesse Unre project that I'm going to talk about here in a minute, we are the state has identified that they want us to do the fountain as a restoration, which essentially means everything needs to go back exactly as it was, and you have a lot less leeway than you do when you're designing with rehabilitations. So just a few of the projects that I've worked on over the past 7 years when I've been back at Trainer are the Animal Care and Control Building for the city of San Francisco. That is in the top right. And we worked with the city's Bureau of Architecture as the historic architect. And mostly our role in that was working on the brick facade restoration and the window restoration. But they took this old substation and turned it into the Animal Care and Control. So it's now houses a lot of houses animals in the city. It's a really great reuse of what had just been a vacant city building. The Danish consulate, which is one of the few projects that I've worked on that really had nothing to do with preservation, but it was a really fun and interesting project. The building was from the 1960s, but it was really a unique experience to get to work with the Danish government and with the Danish architect. And we got there through a unique set of circumstances from our work with the German consulate, which is the building shown up on the top two left photos. That is a project that I have been working on for the past 7 years and is just now going into construction. And we did the Danish consulate quickly 1 year in between there. But it's 2 mansions that are combined in Pacific Heights, designed by the architects Bliss and Faville, and from the 1920s. And one side is used now as the German consulate offices, and the other side is used for the consul general's residence. And because of all of the process and the security upgrades and the seismic upgrades and getting the permits in San Francisco and getting everything reviewed in Germany, this project has been very much about process and has been a very, very long time going. But we are starting now into our phase construction on that. And then 2 other projects that I'm working on right now that I'm really excited about that are smaller is down on the bottom left. These are 4 agricultural and residential buildings from a former Japanese nursery site in Richmond, California as well, that we're going to relocate and rehabilitate, and they're going to be part of telling the Japanese American story and history from World War II and at the home front. And then the building in the middle is the Japanese language school in Japantown of San Francisco that we're just getting started on a rehabilitation of this building. And we're really excited. They've gotten monies from City of San Francisco and from the state to start the work. We've been working with them for about 4 or 5 years now to get the project outlined and for them to get funding and to move forward. And we're starting with getting that listed on the National Register. The largest project I'm currently working on now, so I have to say all that of 20 years of here and there and working on large projects and small projects kind of has come to what I am working on now, which is the Jesse Unruh building rehabilitation in downtown Sacramento. It's a state of California building. It's the one in this photo on the left. It was constructed in the 1920s along with the State Library and Courts building, which is on the right, and the central fountain. The architecture firm of Weeks and Day won a design competition that the state had put out because they wanted to expand outside of the state capitol. They were seeing a lot of offices and workers going to San Francisco, and they were in fear of losing their stronghold on Sacramento. So they decided it's time to expand. We need these new buildings. So this complex was designed at that time, the 1920s. It was constructed between like 1923, 1926, kind of took a while. The whole complex is listed as a district on the National Register of Historic Places. And here, back in last fall, Gavin Newsom used the building for the backdrop of his inauguration for his 2nd term. They just put a stage over the fountain and then dressed up the building with a big American flag. And that was last year, 2023, just before we put scaffolding all over the building and wrapped the whole thing so we could start our work. But back in 1989, my mom and I posed in front of the same building when we were out visiting cousins in Sacramento. I cannot believe she found these. But so there I am on the left and there's my mom on the right. Even though we were spending the day visiting the Capitol, we decided to stop and stand in front of the Jesse Unre building and take our pictures. So this rehabilitation project is right now at about, the construction cost is at $141 million. And it is part of an overall program with the state of California that they First, they did a program of constructing new offices. Now they took three historic, or they're all historic in their own way, but this one is the oldest, but three existing buildings. And they are all three of them going through major rehabilitation, renovations, all using the progressive design build method. And this, which in and of itself has been very interesting to do that within a historic building. So we spent about a year and a half going through the design process and doing as much exploration in the building as we could, but we still had people in the building for a very long time before they moved out. And this building primarily houses the state treasurer's office. So this is the only historic interior photo we have of our building here, and this is the entry lobby. And these are really the majority of the historic spaces that we have. We have these beautiful terrazzo floors and the cast stone walls and plastered ceilings. And we have that in the entry lobby and the elevator lobbies and the corridors. But then really once you got on into the office spaces, they had been changed so much over the past 100 years that there was not much left. So we're really taking the approach of kind of clearing out everything that is not original in the building, and especially around in those office spaces. And we're putting in new kind of clean, modern office spaces, and then restoring the historic fabric and historic spaces that we have left on the interior, and then a full rehabilitation and restoration of the exterior as well. These are just some fun shots from the building, from the marble sculptures to doing building documentation, and when we were exploring up there to try and get to see the roof. Before the scaffolding was up, we had to ride up on cherry pickers. We have our goddess of nature there at the front welcoming us. These are some of the design images that help to kind of understand the full scope of this project and what we're doing here. And the way the building is set up is it has 4 light wells in it. And so it already has a lot of really great, sustainable elements to it. And, having preservation is inherently sustainable. You're saving a building, you're saving all of this embodied carbon and reusing materials, and you still have a lot of people that, are kind of be naysayers of, oh, but you can't hit lead, or you can't do all the things you can do with a new building. You've got to insulate the walls. You've got to change out the historic windows. You've got to get rid of this, that, and the other. And we've really been able to push on this building and the state, with that being a primary goal of theirs. I think we're doing some really amazing things. They were actually, our baseline was that we get a building that is LEED silver. And right now we're targeting really pretty easily, without doing anything crazy, LEED platinum. We've, of course, we're speccing, materials that are green, and this is in downtown, but so there's a lot of walkability and all of that. But a lot of what this process also, why we're doing beyond just preserving the building and all that's inherent there that's sustainable, is the state has, they have pushed a big initiative that they want to electrify all their buildings. So this building is going completely electric, and they're removing it from all of their previous gas connections. And you can see here in these renderings off to the side, this kind of modern workplace intervention that goes into the historic envelope. And this is, I didn't realize I was already at my last slide. This was a day out in front of the Unre project that we celebrated the 100-year anniversary of the setting of the cornerstone, which is what the historic photo is there behind me. And this was last October. I believe they put some sort of a time capsule box and actually set it within the stone, which, while we would like to get out, would require removing the entire piece of granite. So I think it's going to stay there. And in general, I guess I'm kind of curious maybe just to go and see what questions I have, or people would like to talk about, rather than otherwise I could just go on. But I think I'm not sure how much, I should talk about being a woman in preservation or what I see. I mean, this has been a really interesting and it's been a really interesting journey. What I was doing 20 years ago is very different from what I'm doing today, being the lead architect on this project and managing this very fast-moving design build preservation project, and feeling a lot of times like I'm the Lorax, saving the building from whatever they want to do, that they can just get in there and get it done. We have a really great team that, oh, I don't think I got that picture up there. I had a picture that I was going to put that has our whole team of all the women that are working on this project. And one of my favorite things was early on when I was walking in here with a group. I think it was just myself and then a group of men, walking around the building. And as we were leaving, the security guard said, "What are you doing? And, who are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm the architect on this. We're getting ready to start a renovation project." And she looked at me and she was like, "You're the architect? That's awesome. I'm so excited to see a woman leading this entire project." And I was like, "Yeah, that is. I hadn't really thought about it." So I like to keep that in the back of my mind, and especially on frustrating days in CA here. So I guess, Rachel, I'll conclude with that at this point and take questions.
Hey, thank you so much. Well, everyone watching, you've got plenty of time to type questions. Okay, Lisa Skiles is complimenting you. Thanks so much. And I've enjoyed hearing about you and your work. I appreciated hearing about your incorporating green or LEED rating systems. Welcome more examples or incorporating with L interiors, air quality, and energy upgrades. Finally loved seeing the picture of the Mexico City studio from your school days. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And I'm interested more to expand on what Lisa said. Can you talk more about that? I feel like that's about the LEED certification and your ability to do that in a historic rehabilitation project, because I feel like that is an obstacle that we run into as preservationists in Arkansas very regularly, with people, the misconception that old buildings are not energy efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually last week just gave a presentation here in Sacramento at the Sustainable Facilities Forum. And I loved it. At the end of the presentation, the state representative who was presenting with us, he said, "Look, if we can do this with this 100-year-old building, you can do this with any existing building." And so I would say basically a lot of what we did, a lot of this had to do with the mechanical systems. And so, I had my engineers with me at that presentation, so I'm not going to pretend to be able to explain that whole process. But we did spend a lot of time doing a lot of building modeling, studying, looking for how we electrify it and get it off of the steam plant that the state was running there. These used to have steam tanks in the basement that, kind of like underneath universities or large campuses, the steam ran all around the state capitol. And it was all, gas fired. So the state's cutting all that off, and instead we have air source heat pumps that are being placed on the penthouse roof, and they cycle down. We have air handler units in the basement. We did a lot of studies on the windows and the envelope. Daylighting was really easy in this building. And that kind of attributes a lot to just the way historic buildings were designed. They were designed for daylight. They were designed for passive air, all these kind of natural approaches. So they had these 4 light wells. So we're able to ring the light wells with private offices and everybody gets light. But the hard part of that was how do you get systems around those 4 light wells? And so that has taken a lot of work and a lot of coordination with our MEP and with the architects and trying to keep the historic fabrics while we're still not having ceilings come down to 6 feet. There's always that negotiation. There definitely was kind of this immediate push of, oh, we need to insulate the walls. But these are thick masonry walls. It's all brick and granite and terracotta clad, which is kind of an interesting story because the buildings originally were designed to be all granite. And then even in the 1920s, they had value engineering and they said, you know what, we can use this granite, Granitex is what it was called. And it was terracotta that was fired to look like granite. So they did that all over the upper parts of the building to save money. And of course, now we're paying Gladding McBean to recreate all of the terracotta pieces that broke and have problems. And it's not really a savings at this stage in the game. But, so we have these really heavy exterior walls. They did not need insulation. That was not really our problem. What was one of our big problems and what we studied a lot was that this building, the original historic windows only existed at the basement and the first floor. So all of the windows above, and then a few in the restrooms and the light wells, but all the windows above, the historic wood windows were gone. And what happened, which I think is a really funny story, in 1979, they had an incident that was referred to in the newspaper as the Great Window Flap, where basically a salesman came to town, and I'm sure this sounds very familiar to all the preservationists out there, and said, look at your wood windows, they're rotting, they're terrible, you've got to get these out. I've got these great new aluminum windows, we're putting them in. So he sold the state on it, and they weren't double pane or anything, they were just single pane aluminum windows, but he told them their, beautiful historic oak windows were rotting. And they started at the 5th floor and worked their way down. They got all the way down to the 2nd floor. And then Jesse Unruh, who was the state treasurer at the time, stopped them and said, no, we don't have HVAC on the weekends. It gets hot up here. I've got to open my windows. These aren't operable. You can't take out any more windows. Stopped it. So now we have historic windows on the 1st and 2nd floor. But then come to find out that contractor or salesman, whoever, was turning around and selling the oak windows for profit. So we lost all the historic windows to the Great Window Flap in the 1970s. But what that did give us was the opportunity to replace the windows, unfortunately not with wood. I couldn't quite get that to fit in the budget, but we are replacing all the windows with thermally insulated, broken dual paned units with the IGUs. And so that way, that allowed us to get a lot of the energy efficiencies and the thermal comfort levels that we needed without having to do anything to the actual walls themselves. And so we're keeping a lot of that historic plaster on the interior face of the exterior walls. And, a lot of it is lighting, redoing all the lighting. So it's, LED and energy efficient. All the water system is all being redone. It's really mostly about the systems. And then we went back to what was the historic layout of the building, which is ringing those light wells with the private offices and then kind of having open offices around them. So it's a long-winded answer.
No, that's good. Thank you. Okay, you got a couple more. Malin Rice. Is the biggest challenge found in the larger projects or the smaller preservation projects? And what is the smallest project you've worked on in dollars?
That's interesting. I think the The largest ones are probably the most challenging just because there's so much to juggle and there's so many aspects and you still want to get into every detail. But at some point, how can you when you have so much that you're working on? So from that aspect, it's just a lot, but you also have, especially in the design build approach, you've got a lot of support and you have a lot of people that are all involved in it. So one of my favorite things is going out on the site and working with the masonry contractor who's doing the Dutchman repairs on the granite. And, they have such a wealth of knowledge and talking about how are we going to fix the terrazzo and that. So I love that you kind of get this larger base of people and you get more assistance, more help, more people coming with different perspectives. The smaller projects, I think what is difficult with them is sometimes just the time they take. You can, especially when it's a project that you're having to raise money for or get grants. We do a lot of phasing so that you just do kind of piece by piece to make it work, right? So the Japanese language school that I was just showing, we're going to phase that. Initially, we're going to have to plan out, kind of the overall what they need to do structurally and what they need to do for accessibility and ADA, but then they're going to start with the auditorium and then we're going to move up to the second floor and the third floor, or we've done them where we do the outside and then we come back and do the inside later. So I think with the smaller projects is just patience, a lot of patience. I think the smallest project that ever was in the office at Carrying Company when I was there was the restoration of a historic flagpole in Livermore, California. That was pretty small.
Okay, thank you. Then we've got, let's see if I can. Okay, from Robert Harris, who has a home in Centerton, Arkansas. The Wilson House was built circa 1905, and all the two-story walls are brick interior and exterior with a fieldstone foundation. Can you talk about some approaches to restore and sustain a house that only the roof and floors are framed?
Well, you're lucky that you don't have earthquakes regularly there. I guess you do get a few. Because out here, unreinforced masonry, you're just going to have to add a bunch of steel to it, which is what we do a lot, or what structural engineers do a lot. But hopefully your brick walls are in good shape. It sounds like maybe I should read the question some more, but it sounds like what you're saying is you have the exterior, but there's not much left on the interior. A lot of the approach that we take to preservation, or that I've, over the years, especially in terms of like design review or reviewing projects, is that in most cases, you're really kind of preserving the exterior. That's the primary goal, especially, that's where most of the historic fabric is. And then at the interior, you have more leeway to put in new walls, new surfaces. And I'm not sure if it was really more of a technical question of kind of what can you do with that house, or what can you preserve? I think I would say you have a little more freedom at the interior to build new, to build within that historic framework.
Yes, like to build an additional support structure inside. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or just do new walls and new chipboard and new restroom. You can kind of have that be new or reinforced, but within that overall footprint of the original building.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a couple for you. What advice do you have for an aspiring preservation architect or designer?
I would say there's a lot, but I would say get out and explore buildings, try and get on construction sites and be part of CA, of construction administration, if you can, when or go visit when projects are under construction. I think that is where you learn the most about a historic building. That's where you learn how it actually goes together. Especially to like young aspiring architects, I would say be really careful about assuming that Revit, that's the program we all use to draw in. It does really great, amazing things, but it also is very frustrating when it comes to preservation because you're not ever gonna find that historic window that's on the building we're looking at as something you can just grab and drop in. And Revit kind of tends to make you think that, or make you not think about how a wall is constructed or what's actually inside of it or how that window is built. And I think one of the things we really work with closely with our new grads or young architects coming up is just getting out there and having them draw details in the field and learn how that building is really put together, to really get out there when they're taking it apart and doing the destructive exploration, because that is quickly becoming a lost art. And there's so much to learn.
I agree. Thank you. Okay, one more came in. Leanne Wiedeker. She says, to vapor barrier or not to vapor barrier in an old wood structure. What is your experience?
Well, that's a tough one. It very much depends on the climate. I think if you have, with a wood building, if you have the opportunity, if you can, especially like in a lot of the buildings, a lot of the historic buildings, wood buildings that we work on, is kind of one approach or the other. You're either taking off the exterior cladding and working at the wall from that level, or you're taking off the interior face and working at the wall from that side. In which case, if you're doing something that invasive, then yeah, I would go ahead and put a moisture barrier up there. But if you're not taking apart the wall, and that's kind of an ongoing argument at our German consulate project. If you're not taking apart the wall in the first place, we're not going to take it apart to put up a vapor barrier or some kind of moisture barrier, because that, if you don't see the problem already happening, then don't try to mitigate a problem that's not there. It's safer to keep the materials in place at that point. And it's so climate driven. So it's very different in California. We can get away with a lot here that, well, for sure in the Bay Area, especially because we don't have freeze thaw cycles, that you couldn't approach materials the same way in Arkansas or in the Midwest.
Thank you. Okay, and then last question. What historic places in Arkansas do you enjoy visiting, or what are some of your favorite historic places in Arkansas?
Well, my favorite historic place in Arkansas is Eureka Springs, hands down. I grew up going there and visiting, every Christmas or break. And then, of course, we got married there, but there's also a deep family connection that my husband's great grandfather, F.O. Butt, was the mayor of Eureka Springs, and he still has his name on a plaque on a sign down there. And there's a great story that he came out, shooting at a bank robber one day, and all this great family lore. So that is still my favorite place to go and drag the kids when we're back.
Well, we all love Eureka Springs, so thank you. That's very interesting that you have the family connections there, and I love that you got married at Thorn Crown. It's beautiful. So thank you so much, Kim, for your excellent presentation. We appreciate it very much, and invite all of you to join us again in June for the next Women in Preservation.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.